Don't believe the hype on Venezuela, Maduro and his new sports suit. At 2:01 a.m. on January 3, 2026, American helicopters touched down at a military compound in Caracas. Within 30 minutes, President Nicolas Maduro, a man who had survived countless sanctions, protests, and diplomatic isolation, was in handcuffs, being flown to an American aircraft carrier. But here's what most analysts missed. This wasn't about Maduro. This wasn't even about drugs, despite the official narco-terrorism charges. This was about China.
I've spent years analyzing geopolitical conflicts, and I can tell you, what we witnessed in Venezuela is not an isolated incident. It's the opening shot of something much larger. Welcome to the Donroe Doctrine. And if you think this is just Trump being Trump, playing tough for his base, I'm going to show you why this might be the most consequential American foreign policy shift since the Cold War. While America was busy bleeding treasure and credibility in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine, something profound happened in its own backyard. China didn't invade Latin America. It did something far more effective. It bought it. The numbers tell the story. In 2000, China's trade with Latin America was negligible, about $12 billion. By 2024, it hit $518 billion. That's a 40-fold increase in 24 years. Today, China is the top trading partner for Brazil, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, and Argentina. Let me put that another way. For every major South American economy that actually matters, China has already displaced the United States. But trade statistics are abstractions. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground. In November 2024, China opened the port of Chancay in Peru. This isn't some small-time facility. We're talking about a $3.5 billion deep-water megaport, majority owned by COSCO, a Chinese state company with fully autonomous cranes capable of handling ships too large for the Panama Canal. The significance? Chancay creates a direct maritime corridor from Shanghai to South America that completely bypasses North American ports. A voyage that used to take 35 days now takes 23. Costs drop by 20%. China's ambassador called it the Shanghai of South America. Peru's transport minister wants it to become the Singapore of Latin America. And here's the kicker. China and Brazil are now exploring a railway that would connect Chancay to the Atlantic coast, creating an alternative to the Panama Canal itself, a Chinese-controlled transcontinental corridor across South America. But ports are just the visible infrastructure. Let me tell you about the invisible kind. China's State Grid Corporation has invested $12.5 billion in Brazil's power sector. They've built ultra-high voltage transmission lines stretching 2,000 kilometers. They now control critical portions of the electrical grid supplying São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. If you live in Brazil's largest cities, there's a reasonable chance your lights stay on because of Chinese infrastructure. In 2025, State Grid won a $3.6 billion contract to build another 1,500-kilometer power line connecting Brazil's renewable energy-rich northeast to consumption centers in the south. They're planning to invest $40 billion more by 2030. And then there's lithium. The so-called lithium triangle, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, holds 60% of the world's lithium reserves. This is the battery metal, the one that makes electric vehicles possible, the one Elon Musk's entire empire depends on. Bolivia alone has double the lithium resources of Chile, and until very recently, Bolivia's state lithium company had billion-dollar deals with China's CATL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, and with Russia's Uranium One. Here's the cold truth. Without South American lithium, there is no American green transition. There is no domestic EV industry. Tesla, Ford, GM, they all need these resources, and China has been locking them up. Now, countries can pretend this is just business, just comparative advantage, just free markets doing their thing, but that's not how Washington sees it. To the American national security establishment, what China has done is build a resource extraction empire in America's strategic backyard, while America wasn't paying attention. The Monroe Doctrine, that 200-year-old policy stating that the Western Hemisphere belongs to American influence, has been gutted, not by tanks or missiles, by shipping containers and power lines. And Trump has decided that's over. The Monroe Doctrine is a big deal. Trump said hours after Maduro's capture, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Doctrine. This wasn't just braggadocio. This was Trump articulating in his own inimitable way a fundamental reorientation of American foreign policy. Let me break down what the Donroe Doctrine actually means in practice. First, the Western Hemisphere is now officially priority number one. Trump's December 2025 national security strategy, 31 pages, devotes 5 pages specifically to Latin America, more than Europe, more than Asia. The document explicitly identifies non-hemispheric competitors as existential threats to American security. That's China, that's Russia, that's Iran. The strategy states that America will use leverage in finance and technology to induce countries to reject what it calls low-cost foreign assistance, meaning Chinese investment. Translation, choose us or face consequences. Second, the doctrine isn't diplomacy. It's economic coercion. In April 2025, Trump announced Liberation Day, a baseline 10% tariff on virtually all imports, but the real weapon is secondary sanctions. Countries that maintain Chinese economic relationships face escalating penalties. The message to Latin American governments is simple. You can trade with China or you can trade with us. Pick one. Mexico has already gotten the message. Under intense pressure, Claudia Sheinbaum's government is advancing legislation to impose tariffs up to 50% on Chinese goods, specifically to prevent Beijing from using Mexico as a backdoor into the American market. Third, military force is explicitly on the table. Venezuela proved this isn't bluster. But Venezuela was the easy target, a pariah state with no powerful friends willing to fight for it. The doctrine goes further. Trump's team has expanded the Monroe Doctrine's geographic scope from the Aleutian Islands to Greenland and the North American Arctic to Antarctica. They've announced expanded military deployments across the Caribbean, Central America, and the Pacific approaches. Secretary of State Marco Rubio traveled to Panama within weeks of taking office, delivering an ultimatum: reduce Chinese influence over the canal or face American measures. Panama got the message. Hutchison Holdings, the Hong Kong company operating ports at both ends of the canal, is now selling those assets to a BlackRock-led American consortium. Panama has withdrawn from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Fourth, the carrot and stick approach. Bolivia's new president, Rodrigo Paz, elected in late 2025, is already terminating lithium contracts with China and Russia. His foreign minister announced they're seeking a long-term relationship with the United States. In exchange, Washington is offering IMF credit lines, IDB financing, and technology transfers. Argentina's Javier Milei has become Trump's closest regional ally. When Trump threatened Panama, Milei declared his unequivocal support for delivering the canal to Trump. He was the only regional leader to refuse signing a CELAC statement defending Panamanian sovereignty. The hemisphere is being sorted, allies and adversaries, dollar or yuan. So where does this lead? Let me walk you through the pressure points that could explode. Mexico is the front line. Mexico isn't just America's largest trading partner. It's the linchpin of Chinese supply chain circumvention. Chinese companies have been building phantom factories in Mexico, importing components and re-exporting them to the United States under USMCA tariff exemptions. The USMCA itself is up for renegotiation in 2026. Trump is demanding not just trade concessions, but security cooperation that amounts to American operational control over Mexican territory. The justification: cartels, fentanyl, migration, but look closer. The real issue is that Mexico is the last major barrier preventing American companies from completely decoupling from Chinese manufacturing. Trump needs Mexico aligned. And if Mexico doesn't comply fully, remember Trump's threat to designate cartels as terrorist organizations? That wouldn't just be symbolic. That would give the U.S. military legal authority to conduct operations inside Mexico with or without Mexican consent. Brazil presents a different challenge. This isn't a weak state that can be bullied. Brazil is the world's 9th largest economy. It has the Amazon, it has oil, it has agricultural exports that both America and China need. And Lula has made clear he won't choose sides. Brazil is a founding BRICS member. At the May 2025 China CELAC summit, Lula stood beside Xi Jinping announcing $3 billion in new Chinese renewable energy investments. State Grid is building more power lines. BYD is opening electric vehicle factories. But Brazil also hosts American investment. Its commodities flow to U.S. markets. Its military has traditional ties to Washington. The Trump administration initially slapped 40% tariffs on Brazilian agricultural exports. They've since been partially rolled back, but the threat demonstrated the leverage America holds. The question is whether Brazil can maintain its strategic autonomy when both superpowers are demanding alignment. Here's a flashpoint almost no one is discussing. Argentina hosts the only deep-water port capable of servicing Antarctic operations, Ushuaia. China has been expanding its Antarctic presence with multiple research stations and increasing naval activity in waters the United States considers strategically vital. Under Milei, Argentina has pivoted hard toward Washington. But what happens if a future Argentine government decides Chinese investment in Patagonian ports is more attractive than American demands? The December 2025 National Security Strategy explicitly extends the Monroe Doctrine to Antarctica. That's not an accident. And then there's Nicaragua. This might be the wildest card. In November 2024, Daniel Ortega revived his long-dormant plan for a Nicaraguan interoceanic canal, 445 kilometers connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific, dwarfing Panama's 80-kilometer route. The pitch, made directly to Chinese investors, is a canal wide enough and deep enough to handle the megaships Panama can't accommodate. A route completely outside American influence, a permanent alternative to U.S. dominance of hemispheric maritime logistics. The price tag, between $50 billion and $80 billion. Only a state actor could finance it. If China's access to the Panama Canal becomes untenable under American pressure, Beijing has a backup plan sitting on the table. Now here's the question everyone should be asking: why won't China just leave? And the answer is brutally simple. It can't. China's economy is structured around manufacturing exports and resource imports. It needs Brazilian iron ore. It needs Chilean copper. It needs Bolivian lithium. It needs Venezuelan oil. These aren't luxuries. These are existential inputs. If America successfully forces Latin America to choose, and Latin America mostly chooses America, China faces resource strangulation. Not immediately, not catastrophically, but slowly, steadily. The raw materials that feed Chinese industry become more expensive, harder to access, subject to American approval. That is unacceptable to Beijing, which means China will fight back. We're already seeing the playbook. Hours after the Venezuela strike, China conducted Justice Mission 2025 military exercises simulating blockades of Taiwan's largest ports. The message was unmistakable. If you can conduct military operations to secure your strategic interests, so can we. Analysts in Beijing are explicitly noting that Trump's willingness to use force in Latin America provides rhetorical ammunition for similar Chinese actions in the Taiwan Strait. This is the escalation trap. America acts in its hemisphere. China acts in its neighborhood. Each action justifies the other. Each response raises the stakes. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war over Soviet missiles 90 miles from Florida. What I'm describing isn't nuclear, but in some ways, it's more dangerous, because this isn't a single crisis that can be resolved through negotiation. This is structural competition over the economic arteries of the global system. There's no missile to remove, no single concession that fixes it. Either China maintains its resource access to Latin America, or America reasserts hemispheric dominance. Both cannot happen simultaneously. That's why I believe we're heading toward a long confrontation. Not necessarily hot war, though Venezuela shows that's possible, but sustained economic warfare, competing infrastructure, proxy political battles, coups and counter-coups, a second Cold War. But this time, in America's backyard. There's one more actor in this drama that we haven't properly discussed: Latin America itself. For 20 years, Latin American countries benefited from great power competition. They could play Washington against Beijing, extracting concessions from both. Chinese investment filled gaps that American neglect created. That era is ending. The Donroe Doctrine is forcing a choice. and the consequences of choosing wrong from Washington's perspective have become viscerally clear. Venezuela's Maduro chose wrong. He's now in a Manhattan jail cell facing drug trafficking charges. While American officials discuss who will run his country, other leaders are watching. Bolivia's Paz pivoted immediately after taking office. Panama's Molino folded under pressure. Argentina's Milei never needed convincing, but not everyone will comply. Brazil won't abandon its China relationship without a fight. Mexico's nationalism runs deep. Cuba and Nicaragua are ideologically committed to resisting American hegemony. What happens when immovable objects meet irresistible forces? If history teaches anything, it's this: when great powers collide, small nations suffer. The battlegrounds of the Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, Central America, weren't superpowers. They were the places superpowers fought through. Latin America is about to learn what it means to be the battlefield. The Donroe Doctrine isn't just a policy. It's a declaration that neutrality is no longer an option, that the era of multi-alignment is over, that America is, in Trump's own words, back home, and it's angry. The question now is whether Latin America can chart its own course, or whether the choice has already been made for it, whether the coming decade will see genuine partnership and development, or whether it will see the return of something darker, something older, the shadow of empire falling once again over a continent that thought it had finally escaped. The signs are not encouraging. The tanks are not rolling, not yet, not everywhere. But the pressure is mounting. The ultimatums are being delivered. The choices are being demanded. And in boardrooms and presidential palaces from Mexico City to Buenos Aires, leaders are calculating not what is right, not what is just, but what is survivable. That's the world the Donroe Doctrine has created. A world where geography is destiny once again, where being close to America means being subject to America, where the price of sovereignty might be economic ruin or worse. China built its Latin American strategy on a premise: that economic engagement would be protected by the international legal order. That sovereignty meant something. That trade could flow regardless of politics. Venezuela proved that premise was contingent on Washington's restraint, and that restraint has ended. What comes next is uncertain. But one thing is clear: the rules have changed, the game has changed, and Latin America, caught between two giants, will bear the consequences. Whether those consequences look like prosperity or devastation, partnership or domination, independence or subjugation, that story is still being written. But the pen is no longer in Latin American hands. Let me leave you with one final thought, one that keeps me up at night as an analyst. The Donroe Doctrine assumes that America can win this competition, that Latin American countries will ultimately choose Washington over Beijing. That economic pressure and military threats will be enough to roll back 2 decades of Chinese integration. But what if that assumption is wrong? China isn't standing still. In May 2025, Xi Jinping hosted the 4th China CELAC Forum in Beijing. Leaders from across Latin America attended. Xi announced a new $9 billion credit line for the region. New free trade agreements were signed with Ecuador and Nicaragua. Colombia joined the Belt and Road Initiative. The numbers keep moving in China's direction. Chinese exports to Latin America grew 8% in 2025, even as exports to the United States fell 18%. Beijing is adapting, finding new routes, new partners, new ways to maintain its position. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For many Latin American countries, China offers something America doesn't: investment without conditions, infrastructure without lectures, partnership without ultimatums. The United States has free trade agreements with 11 Latin American countries. But what has America actually built in the region in the last 20 years? Where are the American ports, the American power lines, the American railways? The answer is nowhere. America offered ideology. China offered concrete. That's the vulnerability at the heart of the Donroe Doctrine. It's trying to win a competition through coercion that it already lost through neglect. It's demanding loyalty from countries that Washington ignored for a generation. Some countries will comply. They have no choice. Their proximity to America, their economic dependence, their military weakness, these factors make resistance impossible, but others will resist. They'll find ways to maintain their Chinese relationships despite American pressure. They'll hedge, they'll delay. They'll play both sides until they're forced to choose. And when that choice comes, some of them will choose China. Not because they love Beijing, not because they believe in Chinese values, but because China has been there, building things, signing checks, treating them like partners rather than subjects. The Donroe Doctrine might succeed in rolling back some Chinese influence. It might secure the Panama Canal and the Lithium Triangle and the strategic choke points that matter most to Washington. But it might also accelerate the very thing it's trying to prevent. It might push fence-sitters toward China. It might unite Latin American nationalism against American imperialism. It might create the kind of anti-American coalition that Washington has feared since the Cold War. History is full of hegemonies that overreached, that demanded too much, that turned friends into enemies through arrogance and force. America has been the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere for 2 centuries. That dominance is now being challenged for the first time since the Soviet Union placed missiles in Cuba. How America responds to that challenge will shape the century to come, not just for Latin America, for the entire global order. The Donroe Doctrine is Trump's answer. Force, coercion, ultimatums, the iron fist inside the velvet glove, with the glove now removed. It might work. Empires have been built on less, but it might also fail. And if it fails, if Latin America slips further into Chinese orbit despite everything America throws at it, then the Donroe Doctrine won't be remembered as a restoration of American power. It will be remembered as the moment America lost its backyard. The stakes couldn't be higher, the outcome couldn't be less certain, and the world is watching to see what happens next. One thing I know for sure, this story is just beginning. The opening shots have been fired, the battle lines are being drawn, and somewhere in Caracas, in a country now under American supervision, the ghost of the Monroe Doctrine has risen from its grave. It has a new name now, and it's hungry.